Hi, it's Jim Gray, and let's get down to it. Okay, in our last tutorial, we were talking about the Best Life Funding worksheet, and we went through Fred Agent, his example. And again, you're in your Agent Production Tracker. It has 3 tabs. The first tab is your Best Life Funding worksheet. The second tab is your Key Activities Calculator. And your third tab is your Power Metrics Overview. And we just went through your Best Life Funding worksheet. And if you remember, I'm going to go back over here. For Fred needed 41 units to live his version of his best life. So now we know that Fred needs to produce 41 units. So now the question is, how do we determine what activities that Fred should be involved in a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? What is Fred's 20% that he needs to be engaged in to deliver 80% of his results? Well, that's what the Key Activities Calculator will help us determine. So if you go over there, here's what I want you to observe. Here we see the 41 units. This is what Fred wants to do this year, 41 units. And remember, this is where Fred would make a determination. How many of the 41 units will be sellers? How many will be buyers? The difference between the two will determine the type of action that he will take. So let's assume Fred believes he's going to do 60% of the transactions as sellers. So 41 times 60%, this means 25 closings of the 41 will be sellers, which leaves the remaining 16 to be buyers. So here's what we have. We have an activities calculator for sellers and an activities calculator for buyers. So I want you to walk down this with me. Now the calculator is going to do this for you. Everything that's in a yellow cell is variable, so you can play with that. Everything that's in a clear cell is a formula, so don't mess with that, okay? So clear formulas, or rather yellow cells, are variables. You put numbers in, and if it's a clear cell, it has a formula in there, so just leave that alone. So let's walk down the seller calculator, seller activities calculator. So we see that Fred wants to do 25 units. Here's what he assumes. Have you ever had this happen? You have a listing under contract, right? And it gets ready to close and it just blows up, right? So let's assume Fred's saying, okay, of all the listings that he gets under contract, some of them just will not close. And he's estimating 5%. So to close 25, it means he's got to make sure that he gets 26 securely under contract. Now here's the thing. Every listing that Fred puts up, he knows is not going to get a purchase offer. So Fred's assuming that 75% of the properties he lists will get a contract. So to close 25, right, he is going to get 35 under contract, right? So 35 under, or let's put it away. He's going to put up 35 listings, 75% of them, or 26, will get a purchase offer, and of the 26, 25 will close. Okay, so now the question is, to get 35 listings, how many listing appointments does Fred need to go on? Well, that is answered by what is Fred's conversion rate at the table. So Fred assumes that for every person that he meets in a bona fide listing appointment, he's going to close 60% to a listing contract. If that's true, then Fred needs to go on 58 listing appointments, knowing that he'll take 35 listings, knowing that 26 of those listings will get a purchase offer, and of the 26, 25 will actually close, okay? So if Fred's got to go on 58 appointments, how many does he have to set, right? Because not every appointment you set will actually show up, right? So here's what Fred assumes. Of the appointments he sets, 85% of them will result in an in-person meeting. So, walk with me on the logic here. If Fred sets 68 appointments, he'll meet with 58, 35 will sign, 26 will get a purchase offer, and 25 will close. So here's what Fred knows. He's got to set 68 appointments in the next year, okay? So if Fred works 48 weeks in a year, so there's 52 weeks in a year. If he takes a month off, he'll work 48 weeks. Look at this. If Fred sets 1.4 appointments a week, he will get there. And now I'm picking up my 1970s calculator. I'm taking 1.4 and I multiply that times 4. So Fred's got to set about 6 listing appointments a month, right? Okay, now that's on the seller listing side. Now let's go to the buyer side, right? The logic is very similar. Fred, to review, needs to close 41 units. 25 of those will be sellers. 16 will be buyers. So here's how the logic goes. In Fred's experience, to close 16, he knows he's going to have about 2 or 3% that will never make it, even though this buyer wrote an offer. The deal just blows up before it can close. So he knows he's got to put 17 buyers under purchase offer, right? Get an accepted purchase offer to close 16, okay? So now the question is, of the buyers that Fred will be shopping with, how many will actually write a purchase offer? Well, in Fred's experience, he says, well, if they get in my car and they're qualified, I'll write offers on 90% of them. So Fred will need to write offers on 19 houses, knowing that he'll get 17 accepted, knowing that 16 will successfully go to close. Okay, so now the question is, of the buyers that Fred meets with in a listing appointment, how many actually qualify for a mortgage? Fred meets with his people before they go to the mortgage lender. We would recommend that you do the same thing. Just get them to come in, do your presentation, have them sign a buyer broker, and then send them off to the lender. So Fred knows that for all the people that sign a buyer broker with him, 80% will qualify for a mortgage. So Fred's got to get 23 people to sign buyer brokers with him, knowing that 19 will qualify, knowing that 17 will write an offer that gets accepted, knowing that 16 will close. Okay, so now, how many buyers does Fred have to meet with, right, to make sure that he signs enough buyers? Well, Fred knows that he signs about half the people he meets with, about 55%. So Fred needs to sit with 42 buyers, knowing that he'll sign 23 to a buyer listing agreement, knowing that 19 will qualify for a mortgage, knowing that 17 will get accepted, knowing that 16 will actually physically go all the way to close. So if Fred knows that he's got to meet with 42, then how many appointments does he have to set? Well, Fred knows that when he sets a buyer appointment, 65% of the time he meets with that person. So Fred knows that if he sets 65 appointments, he'll meet with 42, he will sign 23, 19 will qualify, 17 will write purchase offers that get accepted, and 16 will close. Okay? Do you see how nice and precise this is? So Fred's got to set 65 appointments with buyers. If Fred, we know he's going to work 48 weeks, right? So we take 65 divided by 48, and he's got to do 1.5 buyers per week. 1.4 times 4. So basically he's setting 5 buyer appointments and 6 seller appointments a month. If he does those two things month after month after month, and if he converts at these numbers, then we know he will close 41 transactions, right? And if we go to his funding worksheet here, he'll pay for his life, he'll pay for his business, and guess what? He'll buy that rental property. Guess what? Emily gets braces. Guess what? He'll go to Disneyland. Guess what? He will put money away for his retirement, right? And those ought to be the things that drive him every single day. Okay? So that is your key activities calculator. Now, there's one other thing I want to go over, and that's what I call the rule of 1%. Okay? So if you remember, every key activity or a closing starts its life as a conversation, right? A conversation becomes an appointment, becomes a contract, right? Becomes a closing, which becomes money. So how many people does Fred have to talk to make sure he's able to set enough appointments? Well, right next to your key activities calculators, you're going to see here a little table that I call the rule of 1%. So Fred's got to do 41 closes. Here's what we do. If you take 41 and you divide that by 1%, What that means is Fred's going to have to talk to 4,100 people, right, over the next year. And if Fred's going to work 48 weeks, if you take that 4116 and you divide it by a 48-week work week, Fred's going to have 86 conversations a week, and if he works a 5-day week, basically he has to have 17 conversations a day. Do you get that? So Fred gets up every day and he knows he needs to talk to 17 people a day, because if he does that, he'll set 5 buyer appointments a month, he'll set 6 buyer appointments, and then the metric plays out and he will close his 41. Do you see how that works? When you know how many conversations to have a day, when you know how many appointments you need to set a month, when you know how many contracts you need to take every single month between buyers and sellers, don't you see how it helps you plan your activities and you can see where you are? Okay, I know it's a lot. I want you to marinate in that. Next up, in the next video, we're going to go over the Power Metrics overview. I'll see you in the next tutorial.